Welcome, followers of the Ancient Whisper channel. Our story today is about a prophet from God's prophets, described as the most radiant and illuminating of Adam's children. He was blessed by God with many blessings, granting him kingship, prophecy, and decisive speech. It is said that he was the first among the prophets to combine these. God sent him to the people of Israel to rule among them with justice and spread the truth among people. He is the king, the prophet David. So, who is the prophet of God David? What is his story? What is the decisive speech by which he ruled? And what is his miracle that God granted him, which was not given to any of the prophets before? This is what we will find out in today's episode. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the bell to receive all that is new. Let's begin. Firstly, who is the prophet of God David? It is said he is David, son of Jesse, son of Obed, belonging to the tribe of Judah, son of Jacob, son of Isaac, son of Abraham. David was born in Palestine, where he grew up. He was handsome in creation, with a fair face tinged with redness, blue eyes, slender legs, a thick beard, little body hair, and was the most radiant and clear of people. It is said that when God Almighty created Adam, he stroked his back, and from his back fell every soul that he would create from his progeny until the day of judgment. Then he showed them to Adam. When Adam saw them, he asked God Almighty, "O Lord, who are these?" He said, "These are your progeny." Adam saw a man among them who shone brightly and sparkled with his radiance, light, and beauty, and said, "O Lord, who is this?" He said, "This is your son, David." Adam asked, "O Lord, how long is his life?" He said, 60 years. Adam said, "O Lord, increase his lifespan." He said, "Only if I take it from your lifespan." So God added 40 years to David's life from Adam's lifespan, which was supposed to be 1,000 years. Thus David's lifespan became 100 years, and Adam's was 960 years. Then God Almighty wrote this decree and had the angels witness it. When Adam's life ended, the angel of death came to him. Adam said to the angel of death, "You have hastened, O angel of death, is there not 40 years of my life remaining?" This was because Adam had counted and calculated his lifespan himself. The angel of death said, "Did you not give them to your son David?" Adam denied it. So God Almighty presented the decree and had the angels witness it. In some narrations it is said that God extended his lifespan by 40 years, completing 1,000 years. It was said that since that day the command for documentation and witnesses was established by God from this incident to secure transactions among people so that rights are not lost between forgetting and denial. David had the best voice to the extent that when we see someone with a melodious voice, we say that God has given him a flute from the flutes of David. David was pure and had a clean heart. It is said that he was the first to combine kingship and prophecy, where previously kingship was in one tribe and prophecy in another. The story of David with kingship began when he was a young man in the prime of his life. He was herding sheep. He had 10 brothers, and he was the youngest. 3 of his 10 brothers were fighting in the army of Saul, the king of the people of Israel at that time. His father would always send him to check on his brothers and to bring them food and inquire about their condition in the army. David always wished to join his brothers and fight with them against the enemies. David was highly skilled in war and combat. He always said, "O my father, I have never thrown projectiles in vain." One day, I entered the mountains and found a lion lying down trying to steal a sheep from the flock. I ran towards it without fear, and when I reached it, I threw a stone at it, and it died. Then another day he said, "I walk among the mountains and glorify God, and there is no mountain except that it glorifies with me." His father said to him, "Glad tidings, for this is a gift God has given you." Despite all this, they always prevented David from participating in the war due to his young age. However, one day, as usual, David went to the army camp to check on his brothers, and there he saw Goliath, the giant, the commander of the enemy's army, shouting at Saul's army of the people of Israel, mocking them, asking, "Is there anyone to fight? Is there a warrior?" without hearing a response from anyone. His strength and majesty instilled fear in the hearts of the soldiers of Saul's army. Everyone realized that fighting Goliath represented suicide, destruction, and instant death, as he was among the strongest and most skilled people When David heard what Goliath said, righteous jealousy arose in him, and he decided to fight him himself. What increased his desire was what he heard about the fate of whoever would duel this giant and kill him, as he would be enriched, brought near, and even married off to Saul's daughter. Then, without hesitation, the prophet of God David went to Saul and asked for permission to duel Goliath. Saul warned the young boy David against dueling this giant, but David insisted and persisted in dueling Goliath, trying to convince King Saul by telling him what he had done and how he killed the lion when it tried to take a sheep from his father's flock. Here, King Saul was convinced by David's words and gave him permission to duel Goliath. It is said that King Saul dressed David in the armor of the prophet Moses, but the young boy David could not walk in it, so he took it off. Then the confrontation between the young boy David and the giant Goliath, who terrorized the army of the people of Israel, approached. David advanced towards Goliath with his staff and a few stones he put in a cloth bag, along with his sling. The people of Israel advanced and lined up for battle to watch the confrontation. When Goliath saw David, he began to mock and ridicule him, saying arrogantly, "You, the little one, are you the one who will duel me? Go back, for I do not like to kill you." David replied with confidence and firmness, "But I would love to kill you." Goliath became angry at the young boy's response and said, "And will you kill me with your sling and these stones, which, if they hit me, will be like a dog fetching a stone?" David replied more fiercely and proudly, saying, "Rather, you are worse than a dog." Then David launched his projectile from his sling towards Goliath, and the stone hit him between his eyes, penetrated his head, and killed him. Then he took his sword and severed his head from his body. Thus, Goliath's army was defeated. Then David took over the kingdom of the people of Israel, after the martyrdom of Saul. He became a great king, possessing a majestic authority that God endowed with strength and miracles, unlike any other prophet, except for his son Solomon. And indeed, God would test him with a significant trial. What is this trial? How will it unfold, and how will the prophet of God emerge from it? What will God do with him afterward? Keep watching, because we are going to cover all of that in this episode. After God Almighty bestowed upon his prophet David the great kingdom unparalleled in his time, David did not just content himself with the kingdom of the people of Israel. Instead, his kingdom expanded after engaging in numerous battles where victory was his ally by the command of God. It is said that his kingdom expanded to include Palestine and Damascus, the capital of the Arameans, and all these lands submitted to him after fierce battles. And God opened Jordan to him after a devastating war against the Ammonites, granting him awe and strength and an abundance of soldiers, to the extent that it is said that thousands of men guarded his sanctuary every night. This instilled fear in his enemies and allowed him to triumph over them without war. No one in his kingdom could oppose him, making him one of the most formidable and authoritative kings on earth. This only increased his humility towards God and gratitude towards him. So his character did not change, nor did he become arrogant. Instead, he was always thankful to God, who increased his blessings upon him even more. In addition to kingship, prophecy, and strength, God also granted him wisdom and decisive speech, a great blessing that God bestowed upon his prophet David to strengthen his kingdom with power and awe. Thus, David's judgment among people was definitive and just, leaving no room for discussion or interpretation, leading people to turn to him for judgment in their disputes. The first of his wisdom and justice was that one day, two men came to him arguing over a cow, one of them accusing the other of stealing it from him, which the defendant denied. The next thing David did was to judge between them the following day. However, during the night, God revealed to him to kill the claimant, which surprised David. How could he kill the claimant who was rightfully claiming? There must be something hidden from him. David spent his night contemplating God's command to him. When morning came, David summoned the men and then told the claimant that God had revealed to him to kill him, asking, "What is your story regarding what you claimed against this man?" The man swore by God, "O prophet of God, I was indeed rightful in what I claimed against him, but I had killed his father before that, and no one among the people knew of it." So David ordered for him to be killed, and then ordered the cow's rights to be returned to its heirs. Despite all this patience in worship and the kingdom that God gave him, David was a strong man who ate from the earnings and work of his hand. This was after a prayer he made to God to provide for him, to spend and feed his family from the work of his hand. God responded to him by softening iron for him. David would mold iron with his hands as if it were thread, without fire or hammering. David made the best and finest armor. Then God guided him on how to make and craft it. He was the first to make armor from rings, which were chainmail armors with round links, distinguished by being lighter than other armors and less bothersome to the wearer. Moreover, they protected the wearer from any weapons and shielded them from any harm that befell them. The prophet of God, David, would sell them and eat from their price. When David finished making an armor and sold it, he would give a third of its price in charity to the poor and needy, buy with a third what sufficed him and his household, and save a third to give in charity day by day until he made another. David remained in this state until the David status in the people of Israel was magnified, and they submitted to him. Then God revealed the Psalms to David, a divine heavenly book, just like the other noble and honorable books revealed by God to his prophets, including the Torah, Gospel, Quran, Psalms, and others. Thus, the Psalms were a heavenly book revealed by God to his servant David after the Torah, to complete God's laws and to be referred to by the people of Israel, in case they went astray or disputed. The greatness of David's status and the majesty of his sovereignty were such that God favored him and gave him a voice like no other. When David recited from the Psalms, it was as if he was blowing into flutes. When he chanted the reading of his book, the jinn, humans, birds, and animals would listen to him and glorify along with him. Even the mountains echoed and glorified as he did, morning and evening. One day, he stood among the people of Israel, judging among them. It is said that he declared among them, "By God I will judge among you and will not exclude anyone." God heard this from him and wanted to test him, to put him through a trial to know his mistakes. God sent to him 2 men, or said to be 2 angels in the guise of disputants, to seek his judgment. While David was praying in his sanctuary one day, the 2 men were at his sanctuary, asking to enter. They found him in his worship, so the guards prevented them from entering. They climbed the wall without anyone seeing them, while David was still engrossed in his prayer, and did not feel their presence until they were in front of him. David was startled by them because they came at night, not the time for disputants to enter, or rather because they entered without his permission, or because they climbed over his sanctuary without entering through the door, which no one does except those intending harm. As soon as David saw them, he asked, "Who let you in here?" One of them spoke and said, "Do not be alarmed, we do not intend any harm. We have come to you with a matter between this man and me, and we want you to judge between us with justice." David, after calming down and his fear subsided, asked, "What is your matter?" One of the men began to speak with a tone of sorrow and grief. "O prophet of God, this is my brother, who has 99 ewes and owns much wealth. As for me, I have only 1 ewe, nothing else. One day he came to me and said, 'What do you think, my brother? If you give me your ewe, I will take care of it with my sheep. It is just 1 and will not benefit you much.' He kept insisting, 'O prophet of God,' in his request until he overpowered me in speech due to his eloquence and argument, and he took the ewe and added it to his own. David was moved by the man's words due to his weak condition and leaned towards him. And before even listening to the other man's statement and argument, he hastily issued a judgment, saying, 'He has wronged you by asking for your ewe to add to his own ewes,' and judged the other for his injustice to his brother, even before hearing his reason for adding his brother's ewe to his own. Then the 2 men looked at each other and smiled slightly, then disappeared from before David. So David knew that this was a test from God for him, and that these were but 2 angels sent by God to him to inform him of his mistake. Or rather, when the 2 men left, David began to think about that matter and that judgment, realizing that he had erred by issuing the judgment hastily before listening to the other man. Perhaps he had an argument, and perhaps the one who claimed first had the argument against him. And God Almighty commanded him to judge with justice among people, so he does not lean in his judgment to one over the other, due to eloquence or the weakness he sees in one of the disputants, thus deviating from the path of truth and correctness. Then David knew that he had fallen into a trial and test, and it was incumbent upon him to listen to the other, and he realized that the matter was nothing but a trial, and that he had erred when he thought he was always capable of being just among people. So he fell prostrating to God Almighty, repentant, asking his Lord to forgive him. Some sources mentioned that David continued to pray to God for 40 days to forgive his sin until God forgave him. After this incident, David continued to worship God and judge among the people with truth, being careful in any judgment he issued. And when God wanted to indicate that the judgment after David would be for Solomon, God sent to David one day, while he was judging among the people, 2 men, one a sheep owner and the other a crop owner. The crop owner said, "This man has sheep that one day broke into my crop, and his sheep left nothing of my crop." So David judged that the sheep would be compensation for the crop owner for what he lost. When the 2 disputing men left, displeased with David's judgment, they passed by Solomon, who saw signs of displeasure on their faces. He asked them, "How did he judge between you?" When they informed him of what happened, Solomon said to them, "Had I been in charge of your affair, I would not have judged otherwise, but would have been gentle with everyone." The 2 men returned to David and informed him of this, so David sent for Solomon. When he came to him, David said, "These 2 say that if you were in charge of their affair, you would have judged otherwise and been gentle with everyone. So how would you adjudicate between them?" Solomon said, "I would give the sheep to the crop owner for a year, so that its offspring, wool and benefits would be his, and the sheep owner would sow for the crop owner the equivalent of his crop. Then, when the next year comes and the crop is as it was the day it was eaten, it would be returned to its people, and the sheep owner would take his sheep." David said, "The judgment you have made is the judgment," and judged accordingly. This was a sign and indication for David and the people that the judgment would be for Solomon after David. One day David went out, and he locked the doors so no one would enter upon his family until he returned. Then one of his wives looked into the courtyard and saw a man standing in the middle of the courtyard. She said to those in the house, "How did this man enter while the house is locked? By God, I will not disgrace David," and threatened that she would tell David when he comes, hoping he would leave them. However, the prophet of God arrived at the house at that time, and the man was standing in the middle of the courtyard. David said to him, "Who are you, and how did you enter here?" He said, "I am the one who does not fear kings, nor is prevented by barriers." David said, "Then by God, you are the angel of death. Welcome the command of God." Then David remained until the angel of death took his noble, pure soul. He died at the age of 100 years. When the sun rose, they washed him, shrouded him, and the people attended to carry the funeral of David. That day, about 40,000 monks and thousands of other people were present, as no one had died in the people of Israel after Moses and Aaron, for whom the people of Israel were more grief-stricken than for David. And between David and Moses, it is said, were 599 years. In that majestic funeral, the heat intensified on the people, so they called upon Solomon to hasten relief from the heat for them. Solomon went out and called the birds, which responded, and he commanded them to shade the people with their wings. The birds gathered one to another from every direction until the wind became steady, and the people were almost destroyed by distress. They cried out to Solomon from the distress, so he went out and called the birds to shade the people from the direction of the sun and move away from the direction of the wind. They did so, and the people were in the shade, and the wind blew on them. This was the first thing they saw from the kingdom of Solomon, that prophet king who would have a kingdom like no one before him nor anyone after him. And this is what we will see in the next episode.